This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 323, Pantheon Autopilot. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about Pantheon Autopilot with Nathan Tyler. Nathan is a product manager at Pantheon based in Los Angeles and led the recent launch of Autopilot. Nathan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Joining us for the next 4 episodes, a longtime friend to Talking Drupal, a longtime friend to recording camps all across this great country. Our friend and yours, Kevin Thull. Kevin is a contract front-end developer based in Chicago, but currently hanging out in Asheville. He will talk to us about that more. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
As you might have guessed at this point, I'm John Picozzi, and today joining me as usual, Nick Laughlin. What's going on with you?
Not too much this week. A friend of mine and one of the listeners of the show, Peter, was asking me about some, what I use to kind of budget. And so we started talking about some different budgeting tools, and he introduced me to something called Firefly 3. So I've been playing around with that for the last few days. It's been kind of interesting. Like I said, it's a budgeting tool. I think you can run some imports, but they're mostly manual. So I think it's kind of like you need a budget. So I was kind of looking for something that I could kind of control myself a little bit more rather than, Mint or something where it's, third-party service, data mining, that kind of thing. And Firefly has a Docker container. It's a PHP project, so you can self-host it. And somebody actually put together like a Lando recipe for it, apparently, a couple of years ago. So it seems like an interesting project. I haven't like switched everything over to it or even really imported any data, but it looks pretty powerful, and I'm looking forward to testing it out over the next few weeks.
We're going to go down our first rabbit hole of the show here, because I currently use a Mac-only solution for something similar. So is this, when you say budgeting, is it like, hey, here are your accounts, here's how you're spending things, like reports? I'm looking at the screenshots right now, so I can kind of see that. I'm just curious as to how in-depth it gets.
Yeah, so it seems pretty in-depth, except I think the problem for me is always it's a manual update. Even if it's CSV importing, like you have to download the CSVs every month from your accounts.
Oh, no connections to the accounts to automatically do it.
It does have some tools that you can connect depending on the type of bank that you have, but they're external connections, or you're like using a third-party service to connect. So you're still, like in my case, one of the reasons why I wanted it is it's fully local. So if you use one of those third-party services that kind of aggregate bank data, you're still kind of giving that data to the company to import it. But from what I gather, you can kind of set up kind of like Drupal migrations. You can set up a CSV migration essentially, and then your bank probably has the same format when you download it every month. So as long as you set those up, it'll import transactions. I think it becomes a problem if you, one of the problems for me, at least, that I ran into with these types of things, like you need a budget, is if you don't do it every month, my bank only allows like 2 or 3 months of data before they purge it, unless you go in person and get paper stuff. So if you don't keep up with it, it gets out of sync. So I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with it. I might just do like a, kind of quarterly thing with this, like update all the accounts quarterly and reconcile them to kind of keep track of it. Because, I keep track of the business and personal finances, separately, but, and I don't want this to become like every month we have to spend 4 hours reconciling everything to this software.
I'll be interested to hear more about that, because I usually, do that stuff, on the weekends, and I'm always looking for interesting tools. So
to your point,
spreadsheet.
Yeah, it's a little bit more powerful than a spreadsheet, I think. So, and it has like a lot of built-in visuals and stuff.
I think we have to crawl out of this rabbit hole and move on. But I am interested in hearing another update at some time about how you find that. Let's move on. Kevin, what's going on with you down in Asheville, North Carolina?
Yeah, so I guess I'm carrying on my new habit of randomly being in Asheville during certain things. Our friend Stephanie lives here, so we thought we'd visit, but last July, we came to Asheville and coincided with the Asheville camp, but it was not intentional. And when randomly planning this trip, didn't realize that I would be guest hosting following April, who lives here. So just
very cool. We're keeping it regional down there. Now, will our listeners see a migration from you during the 4 weeks? Will you be migrating back up north?
Yeah, so next Tuesday, we fly out in the afternoon. So for the second half of my guest spot.
So it's going to be
Chicago.
Half and half. There we go. You can give us the snow update from Chicago. See if they have any by that point.
I mean, it's already snowed there, so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, last week.
And they had forced you to move to shift to North Carolina.
I mean, it's 32 out right now. So it's like Chicago weather here.
But not snowing. So Nathan, what's going on with you this week?
So after Autopilot at Pantheon, we spun up a new team called the CMS ecosystem, which has a very broad mandate, that lots of fun projects going on. But in the last week or two, been trying to look at all of the open source repositories we have on GitHub, which is like 227 repositories, and trying to wrangle those and get them into a clear state of what's supported and what level and what community can expect, and setting things up internally to make sure that we can actually follow through and do that consistently. So
opening each one of those repositories in their own tab at once.
Yes. The fans are kicking up full blast on the computer. So.
Awesome. And your soccer league started back up?
Oh yeah. It's with the pandemic, it all kind of shut down, and then they've been kind of slow in reopening, but it just opened back up a couple weeks ago. So I played in an adult rec league, just 7-on-7. And it was never the pinnacle of athletic performance ahead of time, but after a year and a half of nobody playing, it was quite at halftime. It turned into a very leisurely game after, but it was good to be back out there.
Was it indoor or outdoor?
It's outdoor. Yeah.
Okay.
People are rolling with the oxygen tanks down the field.
Our team discussed buying larger set of jerseys than we had a year and a half ago. Everybody needs to size up a little bit.
So for me, in the next couple of weeks, Drupal Providence is actually having their quarterly meetup, and that's going to be on Thursday, December 9th at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we are talking to the folks at Search Stacks about their Search Studio tool and how they helped the city of Nashville, as well as a client of theirs, APQC, with their search needs. So if you're interested in that, we will put a link to Drupal Providence in the show notes, and you can check that out. Let's move on to the module of the week. So this is absolutely shocking, as Jacob Rockowitz has been on the show a number of times. The module of the week has never been web forms. So web forms, or I should say web form, because there is no S at the end of that, right? The web form module does exactly what you think it does. It allows you to build web forms in Drupal. It does. To me, it's like the Swiss Army knife of web form builders, because you can do a lot of different things. I remember a couple of. Probably about a year ago now, I did a quick tutorial one weekend on how to integrate Webform and Stripe to build a donation form, a simple donation form. And it was amazing. Like within an hour, maybe an hour and a half, I had like a donation form up and running. I was able to take payments to a test Stripe account, it was like could have been ready to go with just some front end work done to it to make it look pretty. But yeah, Webform is definitely the gold standard in Webform builders. Anybody have any other instances of they like to use Webform for?
Well, I did that very same thing recently on a project, setting up Webform Stripe, and not for donations, but to do sort of a mini cart to purchase catalogs. And so I'd also do the calculations. I think they're built in now. So yeah, it's interesting how powerful it's gotten over the years, where your first instinct is to go look for a helper module and it's built in. So that's pretty sweet.
I also just want to add that Nate, the original creator of Webform, has also been on the show. So again, yeah, this is definitely a shocker that we've gotten this far without mentioning Webform as a module of the week. But yeah, if you need to build any type of form on your site, whether it integrates with Stripe or not, Webform is definitely the way to go in Drupal.
I'd also like to throw a solicitation in here. If you're a listener and you have a module of the week, you can drop us a short audio clip of you talking about the module, and we will drop it into the show, or you can drop it into the Drupal Slack Talking Drupal channel, and we'll talk about the module that you suggest. Every week we tend to come up with a module and talk about it based on what we're using, within that week. But we'd love to talk about listener supplied modules as well. Let's jump into our primary topic and talk about Pantheon Autopilot. And I think the biggest question on my mind right now, I've read the documentation, so I kind of know, but Nathan, what is Pantheon Autopilot?
Sure. So short version is it automatically updates your Drupal modules, and it does a visual regression test to alert you of any visual changes on your site. So it basically targets that problem of everybody who runs open source sites. Like we love the power and flexibility that it offers, but it comes with some maintenance, and people solve that different ways. But clone it to an isolated environment, update the modules, look at things, make sure that the site hasn't fallen over, try to compare what it looked like before and after, then deploy the modules live. That whole mess, basically taking an automated approach to giving you a first layer of just kind of smoke testing, making sure that everything looks and works the same.
And you said Drupal modules, so it's not just core, it's any installed Drupal module?
Yeah, core and contrib.
Oh, interesting. That's super cool.
Yeah.
So how does Autopilot work under the hood?
It runs on Pantheon, so we'll actually spin up a multi-dev environment, so an isolated environment just to run the tests, and then we take a baseline set of screenshots, and then we run the upstream updates, so core and all the contrib updates. So it's running a drush and things under the hood to do the updates. Then it's taking another set of screenshots and running a visual regression test, and then it will alert you if anything has changed. You're allowed to change the thresholds. Like if you have pages that it has a random testimonial, and so it's always going to change 2 or 3%. You can say only alert me above 5%. We can also exclude certain DOM elements if you want to say just remove that Google banner ad, by the DOM selector, so don't ever include it in the screenshot. You can do that. So there's a number of fiddly options like that. But basically, if everything passes, then you have a choice. You can configure it to go all the way to live. So if you launched a site like 2 years ago and you want to just kind of leave it in autopilot on maintenance mode, you can have it go all the way live. Or if it's really actively developed or you have some other CI pipeline, you could just deploy it to the test environment and have autopilot stop and have the rest of your pipeline pick up, or like just deploy to dev if you want.
That sounds quite similar to Backstop. Is it built on top of Backstop, or is it something in-house or? Yeah.
So we started with Backstop. Backstop's a command line tool. And so you try to force a command line tool into the pipeline, you get some issues sometimes with parsing the output. And we broke apart some of the components that Backstop was using. So we've we've kind of forked Backstop, and then it's kind of turned into our own internal service.
And what does the deployment workflow look like with Autopilot? So you mentioned that you can kind of configure which environment it goes to. And I have two questions about that. Both on the configuration side, is that all in your Pantheon YAML file? And then the second side is, how does that look on the UI? Like, is there a separate section for that, or section tab, a separate tab? How does that work?
Yeah, so we actually are not doing it with YAML. It's actually in the site configuration tab right now, so in Pantheon. And part of that is so we can do some things like we have a one-click setup, so you can just enable it on a site. We crawl the site, we find URLs to suggest to take the screenshots of, and we can establish a baseline percentage for those. So you can basically say, turn it on like these 10 sites, and we can have a good smart set of defaults, versus if it's all Pantheon YAML, you have to like define which URLs and what percentage thresholds and all of that. So we have like a nice visual before and after interface, and for actually looking at the tests, but a lot of the configuration, like if you want to tweak the percentage of what's allowed, like the best place to do that is right when you're looking at the test, rather than like having to jump back to the Pantheon YAML file. So we're looking at maybe adding some terminus commands or Pantheon YAML, like being able to set hard-coded configurations, but we decided to lead with just like interface first.
Okay. And does it store, how many like deployments or tests does it store? Does it store the last 10?
It keeps the update history kind of indefinitely. The visual test, I think we're capping at about 90 days right now.
Okay.
So, I mean, you can go back and look at a test from a month ago, a week ago, which is more than anybody usually cares to go back to anyway. They're just kind of looking in the last run or two.
Okay. And maybe this is a bit more technical, but I'm curious, does that storage count against your cap for the account, or is it separate?
No, it's stored separately. Yeah, like the only cap we have like the number of screenshots or the number of pages that you can take screenshots of. So like you can't say do VRT on 10,000 URLs on the site, right? Like we allow like 15 in our standard plan, which is like more than enough for, home and about and contact us and, a blog post and some different variations. It gives you pretty good coverage over the site. And we have some higher tiers, but that's like the only limit. And then just whenever Autopilot runs, it takes all the VRT. It doesn't count against your quotas or limits or anything.
Drupal is using obviously a composer workflow more and more nowadays. Does Autopilot work within the composer workflow?
Yeah, so Pantheon's like kind of opinionated take on it is integrated composer. So it'll basically run the composer update on the server. If you enable the build step in your Pantheon YAML file, it'll run the composer update when you push. And so it's compatible with that. Like Autopilot will run composer update for you and then take the screenshots and do the VRT, it'll commit those changes to the composer JSON file or composer lock. So it'll, it is compatible with that if you're using Pantheon integrated composer. If you have your own bespoke composer and you're working in an external repo and pushing the artifacts, like they're going to kind of wrestle with each other. So yeah, it's compatible with integrated composer, and we're working on making integrated composer better to more accommodate more people's workflows.
Interesting. And what versions of Drupal is that available on? So obviously 8 is end of life, so there may not need to be support there, but 7's still kicking around, and obviously 9 is out there.
Yep, 7, 8, and 9. Yep.
Okay, cool. And for our WordPress friends or Backdrop friends out there, is this a Drupal only feature on Pantheon, or can you use it with your WordPress?
WordPress as well. So instead of Drush commands, it runs WP CLI, which is their command line based tool that will interact with WordPress.org. So it works the same way, but just the update commands are different. And we see Autopilot as like a thing that can expand into more areas too, like even just testing changes in PHP versions, right? If you're going to change your Pantheon YAML and you want to see before and after with the PHP versions. So right now it's WordPress and Drupal, but there's a lot of other use cases we could expand into.
That's pretty cool.
Does it work with Pantheon upstreams?
Yeah, so it applies the upstream update. So if you just have the core WordPress upstream or the core Drupal upstream, it'll pull those regular commits. But if you're using a custom upstream, you can actually use it to, you could use Autopilot on the custom upstream if you have a dedicated site, and then all the child sites will apply that upstream update and take the VRT. So you're getting like the general case, and then each specific child case would be tested like with the actual content on the child sites.
Nice. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty useful. I'm always curious about projects like this because you mentioned, as we just asked, it works with WordPress and Drupal, and there's just different kind of command line tools. What does the development side of that look like? Like, how are you guys testing this process internally? Because, you know, it's one thing, like this is a tool for developers to use to test updates on their site, but you also have to test like a bunch of different configurations to make sure you're not breaking people. Well, obviously it's, you know, they have to do their own review of it, but you're doing your best guess or your due diligence to make sure you're not going to break everybody's sites randomly by updating them incorrectly or something. So what is that process like, and how are you making sure that you kind of back out if something fails?
Sure. So like the development process of Autopilot, generally, like we have a bunch of different test sites with different variations and permutations of modules and WordPress plugins and versions and multi-site. And so we have a number of test cases that we run against. And then, of course, if anything in Autopilot internally crashes, we have internal error messages that go to our engineering team to look into. But for the user, you know, we're doing that visual test, and you know, it's not going to be bulletproof. Like none of this stuff is ever bulletproof. So, you know, we want this to be an assistive tool. And I think what normally happens in practice in the real world is less than what Autopilot does. A lot of times people will, you know, do update on production, or they do update real locally, make sure that they don't have like just a complete fatal error, and then they just push it live and hope for the best. Unfortunately, that's what ends up happening practically in a lot of cases. So, you know, we're going to build out Autopilot to do a lot more than the VRT, because we want that to be like one component of building confidence. Like we look for internal error, you know, PHP fatal errors, and detect those. We take the screenshots. We want to get to a point where we're doing other things like running accessibility tests and performance, you know, like lighthouse scoring, and doing just even code analysis, like how much code changed, or look at JavaScript errors that might be logged at the console as a result. So there's like a lot of other points that we can bring in to give you more confidence, but we're trying to position it as a very helpful tool, but like it's not there's no silver bullet that's going to solve all of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you can take care of that, like you said, the long-term maintenance projects where there's not a lot of active development, that's a huge win. How long was Autopilot in the works before you were ready to release it?
So I worked on it. I've been working on this problem space for like 5 years. So like the first 2 or 3 years, we operated as an independent company called Staging Pilot that we did it exclusively for WordPress. We did updates and basically the whole product, but our customers were agencies who were providing updates for their clients on like a monthly retainer, and we were providing the service that they used to do that efficiently. And then Pantheon acquired it in 2019, and then we've been, I guess, about a year and a half of kind of reworking and refactoring and like making it efficient and like just closer to the metal on the Pantheon platform, using multi-dev, using all the things that make it more scalable, because we're rolling it out to like all the customers.
That's pretty cool. I didn't realize it was an acquisition, but that makes sense. So I'm hearing from that you come from the WordPress world.
Yeah.
So it's been fun jumping into the Drupal work stream.
Yeah, I've done a couple Drupal projects back in my agency days, but I'm unfortunately one of those WordPress people. So thank you for having me on. Even if you're discovering it now, hopefully the rest of this call continues. If I find myself seriously booted, I'll understand.
No. We don't discriminate. Like our second to last guest host actually works for Automatic. So yeah, we're definitely a Drupal podcast, but we're friendly to our brothers and sisters in the CMS world.
We like to consider ourselves an open source podcast.
Yeah, I mean,
open source first.
we're all in this together against Squarespace and Wix and GoDaddy overnight website builder. So
I'm curious, this may be a no, but I'm curious if you and your team at Pantheon have worked or borrowed ideas from the automatic update initiative that Drupal has been working on for the last few years, in particular the composer workflow that they've been kind of trying to work out.
Yeah. So it's been really interesting to watch. Like, obviously, this is a space that everybody has to deal with in some way. And like, so Drupal is dealing with it in one way, and WordPress is dealing with, like, they now have auto updates and you can enable it like module by module, or have core. And so we've definitely been looking at what everybody's doing and taking it into account. Some of like a vast amount of the effort, like, doesn't necessarily apply to us as much, because like a lot of the effort is going towards like, how do you run this in production? Like have in the WordPress case, right? Like being able to click auto update and make sure that like the zip downloaded successfully, it unzipped successfully, it moved all the files into the right place, and how, if anything goes wrong in the pipeline, how do we like restore it back, or if there's a fatal error. And in our case, like it's all running in a multi-dev environment anyway, and like so the risk isn't as high, and then like we actually still find value, and like we want to let those failures happen if there's a fatal error on the site, because we want to take a screenshot of it and show it to the user and let them go to the multi-dev environment and like fix it and look into the situation. So some of the stuff doesn't apply as cleanly, but we've definitely been looking at, like, especially with the composer workflow and how that's going to inform our next version of like integrated composer. Because like integrated composer has like a roadmap and things that need to get built out to make it a real viable alternative for people with really complex workflows.
Okay.
So I shouldn't be doing updates directly on my production environment. Got it. That's a good takeaway right there.
And maybe that's a WordPress thing. Maybe you Drupal guys learned that a while ago, but
yeah, there's actually not, like once database updates happen, there's usually not a very clean way to roll back update. And that's probably true in WordPress too, but yeah, Drupal a very long time ago, you've learned to test those on a different environment. So Pantheon's obviously committed to open source, not just because they host open source, but you mentioned at the top of the show, your new project is wrangling 227 open source repositories. I'm curious if that extends to something like this. Like I just asked about the automatic updates initiative. Is anybody in your team, or are you kind of giving some feedback to that initiative or contributing code to kind of help them? Like, here's the problems we ran into at Pantheon implementing this that you might want to consider, and here's how we solve them.
Yeah, we're not contributing code back at this point, like, again, because I think that's kind of different approaches, and I don't think there's code to contribute, but I know there have been active conversations, like posts on WordPress track and in Drupal forums, I believe, to just kind of align on how it's being approached.
So I'm assuming this could be a terrible assumption on my part, but I'm assuming this is less of a tool for developers and more of a tool for like technical website owners. I'm curious how those two groups are using and reacting to Autopilot.
Yeah, it's kind of both. Yeah, if it's a technical website owner or kind of like an IT manager type person, like you can get those test results, and basically the 90+% of the time that things go fine, like you're just getting the updates applied. They can happen every day or every week. Like you get that consistency. I think the value of the failed test, like ultimately you still need a developer to evaluate, like when the test fails, right? Here's the before and after. It's the perfect kind of bug report for a developer. It says this module is updated from this version to this version. Here's the pages that broke, and here you can see the before and after, and click here and you can go like download the Git branch where that error exists and then troubleshoot it. So I think developers find value in receiving that report, but we also know there's a lot of like sites and large portfolios out there, like where it's usually a junior developer, new guy gets tasked with doing the tedious updates, right? And so it's replacing some of that time and letting them kind of focus on higher value work. And so I think developers are liking it too, because nobody likes getting stuck with that
There's
work.
nothing more fun than having a junior developer do module updates and having them have a regression test that's like website, white screen, figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's interesting. I think it is very tedious for a lot of people to update their Drupal sites, and I think making that easier, especially with a testing layer, is super helpful. So yeah, I can see that being beneficial to everybody.
Yeah.
Circling back to Drupal, and when it actually does get the automatic updates built into it, do you then see a need for autopilot going away for Drupal sites?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously there's always gonna be value in the testing, right? Especially if we build more stuff besides visual testing. If we're looking at adding behavioral testing, so you actually check functionality, doing accessibility and performance comparisons as well. Doing the update is one part of the problem. You have to know that there's a new update. You have to do the update. You have to ideally do that in an isolated environment. You do some testing, then you need to deploy it. And so the core initiatives by WordPress and Drupal are helping with the update portion of it, and by definition deployment if it's happening on production. But the testing, having that confidence is the biggest missing piece, I think, because in WordPress, if I could just turn on auto update blindly on my production site for 100 plugins, modules, and core, I would not do it, because I wouldn't trust that it would last more than a few weeks without something going wrong.
Again, website,
point.
white screen.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it's pretty ambitious. I'm curious about what's on the roadmap, and is this initiative trying to pull a lot of the CI stuff back into Pantheon directly? Like, people use Circle CI or Travis to run a lot of these tests and visual regression tests. Mm-hmm. Is Autopilot in this initiative trying to pull that back in directly into Pantheon as a value add for your customers?
Yeah, I mean, we're never going to replace all of the customization you can do for a site with a custom pipeline and workflows and Circle CI. Autopilot's not going to solve Airbnb's problem, right? They're not just going to use Autopilot and call it a day, right? There's always going to be more sophisticated needs. I think the real thing we're trying to stress with Autopilot is that kind of the zero configuration or near zero configuration option. Having that one click, turn on Autopilot on this site, it's way better than nothing. It'll take screenshots of 15 pages on your site. It'll push them through and automatically update what it can. It'll tell you when something goes wrong, because we didn't invent visual regression testing. We're not inventing behavioral testing. All these are very established disciplines, but in reality, it just doesn't happen for practical business reasons and cost reasons. It takes a lot to maintain these tests. Mm-hmm. There's tons of sites that are just not well maintained, don't have any testing at all. And so we want to have a zero config option that gives you that 80%, gives you some coverage without any effort or maintenance. And so I think there's always going to be space for Circle CI and all that kind of stuff.
Just out of curiosity, and you may have mentioned this earlier, I may have missed it, but I'm wondering, is there a plan to allow for custom or some level of custom testing where for example, a BHAT test, you could say hey, go to this page, click this button. If you get this page, win. If you don't, there's an issue, kind of a UI, if this, then that sort of build test builder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's a question of how far we go down that path or not. Sure. Obviously for the super advanced cases, you're always going to be doing Circle CI in some crazy pipeline. But we do want to have that thing where we have that baseline visual regression, and maybe you can upload a couple BHAT tests that you wrote, and those can just run. And that might make testing more accessible to a project where you don't have the budget to go set up the Circle CI pipeline. They don't want to do all of the stuff, but you could say, hey, I can just upload this BHAT test and make sure your contact form submits, every time there's any update or something super basic. That's definitely on a roadmap, something we're looking at. Again, we don't want to it's a slippery slope, because then we might end up just spending years building Circle CI, which we don't want to do. Like, so we have to basically cut it off and say, like, here's that real basic case that would provide a lot of value on those projects where there's not the time or budget or inclination to like take on all of the rest of that.
Yeah, that seems like super, super valuable to me. Like, because you think about like setting up that whole Circle CI infrastructure, and you're like, but if it was just like, oh, I can drop my Behat, like my little Behat test in here, and like, hey, it runs great.
Yeah.
So what else is on the roadmap for Autopilot?
I think it's building other areas of confidence around the update. Like, visual is obviously, if it's 99% different, like, very good signal that something went wrong. If a page is 7% different, like, it needs some more interpretation. So we're looking at pulling in other data points. Like, you could look at accessibility scores and some of the other stuff that we talked about, but also even just looking at publicly available information, like, how many sites is this installed on, like from Drupal.org or WordPress.org, public statistics, like, is this a module that's installed on like 10 million sites and this release has been out for 6 months? Like, higher confidence versus like something that came out yesterday and is only active on 100 sites, then like bringing in these other factors, and we can show that information to you, like along with your test result, be like, here's some other contextual information, which, like, if you're a developer jumping in to look at the problem, that's probably one of the first things you're going to check, or maybe just know intuitively, like, this is this is Webform, so it's probably okay, and it's been out for 6 months, it's probably fine, versus some like random module. So I think that's like, there's a number of different features and things we're building out, but a lot of it is around like, how do we gain more confidence and like triangulate that confidence from multiple points, not just the visual regression test.
I say 80% different, ship it. Clearly, everybody's getting really nervous of me managing websites right now. I can tell as this conversation goes on. So, Nathan, we've heard all the great things Autopilot can do. I'm kind of like drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm ready to jump in. Like, how do I add Autopilot to my Pantheon account? Do I need a specific level of Pantheon account? And how much will this great service cost me?
Yeah, we looked at a lot of different approaches. Like, back in Staging Pilot, my previous company's days, we build it per site per month, because a lot of our customers were agencies who were reselling it, and that was a model that made sense to them. But like with Pantheon and like the web ops approach and positioning, we like kind of decided, like, you don't really want to split your workflow and have some sites that have it and some that don't. So it's bundled into your account level. So it's available for gold, platinum, and diamond accounts. So if you're a contract customer who has a gold account, or if you're through our agency program and have a gold account through there, you can use it on every site that you have access to in that workspace.
Cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
And just out of curiosity, how long does the process take to, like, to go through like Autopilot? I mean, I would imagine the visual regression test kind of depends on how many pages you're testing, but like, what's the average there?
Yeah, it's not instantaneous, because we have a number of steps, including like creating the multi-dev. We create a unique environment, a multi-dev environment for each run. So especially if it's a really large site, even just creating the multi-dev can take a few minutes. So it's usually the kind of thing that you want to click the button and walk away and have a cup of coffee and come back, or really the way it's meant to run is automatically, right? So you set up all your configuration and your thresholds and say, I only want to deploy to dev or test because I'm going to go through some manual process anyway. And then you can just say run it every week, and Autopilot will just run it in the background. And then your experience is like, I wake up and I get a notification of these are the updates that are ready for my review or deployed successfully. So then it won't matter how long it takes, but it's definitely not like a 30-second run, unfortunately.
So just out of curiosity, obviously we've talked about module updates, here and testing that process. But I mean, could it be configured to run on, every push to the repo? Like if you said, hey, I just pushed an update, I want to make sure we do like a visual regression test. Like, is that something that could be set up?
That's something on our roadmap. Is like, it's like slightly different. I mean, basically you're using VRT, but not like autopilot, which is like that whole detect the update, apply the update, deploy the update. Just like for custom changes where you might actually expect a visual change. You just want to confirm that it's the change that you were expecting, or you're expecting the homepage to change on this homepage redesign, but you want the confidence that the 10 other pages on your site didn't change unexpectedly. So we're going to be introducing like an on-demand VRT as like a terminus command. So you could run, or you could arbitrarily just compare this multi-dev against dev or multi-dev against live. So that'll be like an on-demand option that's like VRT, not like distinct from autopilot, but obviously a lot of overlap in like
autopilot light.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because there's a lot of value in just that kind of low level, like just that the visual regression test, even if it's on 10 or 15 pages, even if it's not doing the automatic updates. Sorry, Kevin, what were you saying?
Oh, I was just going to ask, do you need to have a multi-dev free for this to run, or does it count against your set?
No, it doesn't count against your quota.
That's good. I could imagine that. I've run into problems with running out of multi-def before. Never mind having
all the time
process.
We ran into that too when we were trying to run it on customer sites who didn't have an available multi-dev. So we decided to have it not count.
That makes sense. I wanted to shift gears for a few minutes if we could, because I'm really fascinated by the 227 open source projects. So if we have a few minutes, do you have one that kind of stands out in your mind that you weren't expecting, or was kind of surprising that Pantheon, somebody had written at Pantheon and put out there?
Well, there's certainly some where I was just like looking at the long list as the first thing was just like, what are all these things? And some of them are like, what is the Terminus Pancakes plugin? What the heck is that? Like there's some very small, like kind of utility repos like that, which is Pancakes being the database icon, I guess, on SQL Pro or any of the database tools. So it's like it's a command line extension for Terminus. So you can say like open in my like SQL editor on my computer.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the most surprising when I was scanning the list. I was like, just that name jumped out to me, and I couldn't quite figure out what it was by the name of it.
You're like International House of Pantheon. What is this?
To go down this rabbit hole a little bit further, I'm curious what your strategy is for kind of wrangling those. Like, what's your strategy? Obviously, kind of going to get that bird's eye view and get an idea of them, but what's your strategy for getting that infrastructure in place to maintain them, to decide what should be maintained? Have you gotten that far to really think about that, or?
Yeah, I mean,
the process.
The very first goal is like to let people know what they can expect. Like, was this a Hack Week project that we've just open sourced because yay open source, but we're never going to touch it again? Like, have at it, like use it will, like, or is this something that's like a pillar of our platform, or something that like, are we going to update it every time Drupal updates, or every time the latest version of PHP? Like, what can you expect from this project? And like, Pantheon has resources dedicated to actually doing this level of service on the repo. I think, I mean, it's a problem we're all familiar with in open source, but like even just communicating that clearly, I think is the first goal, so that people can make good decisions about like, should I use this in my project, or what should I expect? So first defining like, going through and figuring out like delineating what those levels of support are. Like we're kind of working through that right now. We have a couple, probably like 3 or 4 levels of just like, good luck, have at it, all the way to like fully supported. Like we're going to update this every month and like make sure it's up to date and works with everything.
Okay.
And then obviously that's going to be constrained by how many people and how much capacity and appetite we have for maintaining those things. But primary goal is to communicate so people know what to expect. And then we are going to want to have a set of things that people can really rely on and know, like, hey, this is also going to get feature updates and enhancement. It has a roadmap, like, or this is just in maintenance mode. You can expect that it's always going to work with the latest version. So that's kind of how we're tackling it now. And then we'll see, right? bunch of recurring tasks and like ongoing schedules to maintain these things. But we are building up a team around this. Like this team didn't exist like 6 months ago, and we have 8 engineers on it now. So like, and we're still hiring for it. So like we are committed to trying to take on some of these things that have been a little neglected.
So the burning question is, where's Terminus Pancakes going to fall on that list?
Oh, top shelf. That's like the banner pillar product that's going to work forever.
And I will be disappointed if there isn't a Terminus syrup plugin at some point in the near future.
Terminus Pancakes fate hasn't been officially decided yet, but
this is really great. Nathan, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate your time and thank you for joining us today.
All right. Thank you.
For our listeners, if you have any questions or have any feedback, either about Autopilot or for Talking Drupal, you can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal or by email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack and the Talking Drupal channel. And if you're interested in more show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and Chad's Book Corner, you can sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You can promote your camp on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/camp promo.
I'd like to thank our patrons for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. If you are a patron, you do get access to a little bit of the before and after show, and you can learn more about becoming a patron on talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button.
Okay, we've made it to the end of our show. Nathan, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, ask more questions about Pantheon Autopilot, or possibly apply for a job at Pantheon, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. You can email me at nathan.tyler@pantheon.io. It's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Cool. Kevin Thull, where can people find you?
Email, I'm ktoll@bluedropshop.com, but better off to do Kevin J. Thull on Twitter.
Nick?
You can find me online pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. You can find me at picozzi.com. Or if you're interested in EPAM, you can find out about EPAM at epam.com.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Have a good one, everyone.